Welcome everyone to today's online event, Fearless Watercolor for Beginners with Sandrine Pelissier. My name is Sarah Alspaugh. I am the online education manager here in the Fine Art Department at F&W, and I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Just a few housekeeping items before I turn things over to Sandrine. Just letting you all know that you have been muted and entered this webinar in listen-only mode, and that's just so we don't pick up noise from your end. However, you will be able to hear Sandrine and see her PowerPoint presentation. If you are having any technical questions, please type those into the question section of your GoToWebinar control panel, and I'll help you out with those as they occur. Also, if you have a question for Sandrine, you can type that into the question section as well, and we'll have some time at the end of her presentation to ask those questions to her. So type all of your questions into the question section of the GoToWebinar control panel. We are recording today's session, so if you know somebody who was unable to join us, feel free to share the recording with them after today's event. You'll get an email in the next day or two with a link to watch the recording, which will be posted on the Artist Network YouTube page as well as a blog post on artistnetwork.com. So keep an eye out for that email, and also it'll include a link to save 10% on Sandrine's new book at northlightshop.com. So you can purchase Fearless Watercolor for Beginners in either the paperback or ebook version and save 10% with the coupon code that, again, will be coming your way in the follow-up email. And I'll also share that code with you if you're able to stick around to the end of today's webinar. So again, welcome everyone to Fearless Watercolor for Beginners with Sandrine Pelissier. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Sandrine here, and then I'll turn things over to her. Sandrine has been living in North Vancouver, Canada for the last 15 years. She teaches workshops in her North Vancouver studio and via several Vancouver area arts associations. Sandrine is an adventurous artist who enjoys experimenting with various media and techniques. She is inspired by exciting patterns in both nature and cityscapes and has a fascination for people and faces. Although her art could be described as somewhat realistic, it often offers a bit of abstraction or a part left to chance or fantasy. Welcome, Sandrine. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Thank you, Sarah.
You can go ahead and take it away. I can't wait to see what you have to share.
Okay, thanks. So, yeah, my name is Sandrine Pelissier, and you can see a picture of me and my family here. I have 3 kids. They are all in high school now, so that leaves me a bit more time to paint, which is great. And I live in North Vancouver, but originally I'm from France, so maybe you can hear a bit of an accent. North Vancouver is a great place for landscape painters because we have the forest, the mountains, and the sea. So many inspiring places to paint. Personally, I really enjoy painting the rainforest, and you will see some example in the next slides. So today I'm going to talk about watercolor, but I'm also going to talk about the process of making art and, for example, enjoying the process, breaking the rule, experimenting and taking risks, and also about finding your own style. And at the end of the presentation, I'm going to show you some screenshots of the book and what's inside the book. So this is the book that just went out, Fearless Watercolor for Beginners. So I kind of see this book as a toolbox, like you will get in there all the techniques you need to get started with painting in watercolor. But I will also give you a choices of different ways you can achieve the same result, and you can try them out and see what works the best for you. Because I believe that not the same techniques or the same methods are working for everybody, and sometimes you have to try and see and find your own ways. So, but I will talk again about this at the end of the webinar. But for each techniques, I will give you a few choices of how to achieve the same result. So let's talk about enjoying the process. I really think painting should be fun, and painting as and drawing and anything else, you know that to become good and proficient at something, you need to invest the time and you need to practice, practice, practice. And you know what they say about these 10,000 hours you need to spend training for something so you become good at it. And so painting is the same, but I think if you're going to spend so much time practicing, you might as well enjoy it and making it fun. Then you have the motivation to spend more time painting. So sometimes we kind of lose that joy because of pressure, and one of the pressure we can put on ourselves is because we did invest in material and we did invest in time, and art supplies can be quite expensive, but what helps me is to remember that no artist has a 100% success rate, and we all happen to make sometimes paintings that we don't like and that will end up in the garbage or the recycling. But this doesn't mean that you wasted your time. Like maybe you learn something, and maybe what you learn is just not what to do. But the process of learning is you will always have some failures when you learn. So it's part of the process of learning. And also, what you consider a failure might also be reused. So, for example, I knew about this artist that was using the painting she didn't like, and she would cut them into some business cards squares and then stamp them with her information. And then she was recycling the paintings into business cards, and they look great. And you have other ways also of recycling your paintings. Maybe you can use them as collage and they can be part of a new painting, or there are many things you can do. There are also some materials you can use that will make the process of painting more fun. With watercolor, Yupo paper is really fun to use. I was really excited when I first tried it to see that I could change my mind as many times as I wanted to, and you can just wipe off the paint with a tissue paper and you can restart painting an area like as many times as you want. On the picture here, so it's one of the techniques I'm showing in the book. I did use a wax resist with oil pastels to draw the contours of the flower. And these oil pastels can be colored too. So I used, for example, yellow in the center of the flower. And it kind of helps with controlling the paint on Yupo paper because it moves really fast. So it keeps it into some areas where you want the paint to stay. It makes it easier to paint. And Yupo paper is really fun. If you haven't tried, I encourage you to try it. The paint dries just by evaporation, so it makes these really nice textures and it works really well with watercolor. Another thing we can think that helps enjoy the process of painting is that perfection is overrated. And I think watercolor is the perfect medium because it looks good when it's not perfect, or when it's a bit messy, or when you have drips and splatters or blooms. To me, it's part of the charm of watercolor. So sometimes if we let go of our ideas of painting the perfect and very neat picture, it can be fun too. And I think it looks good with watercolor. So another point about enjoying the process of painting, I think it really helps if you can set up a corner in the house. Like you don't really need to have a studio, but just if you can have a table or a space in your house that is dedicated to painting, then you don't have to put everything out and put everything away every time you want to paint. And it also helps to have a time dedicated to painting. Especially if you paint from home, like it's difficult to not be distracted by everything you have to do, like the laundry or walking the dog or whatever. It's nice if you can say, for example, from 12 to 4, it's my painting time and it's all I do. Sometimes you have to be a bit selfish, but it really helps with enjoying the process. And also, there are many things you can do to feel better when you paint. Like to me, I like to have, I always have a big pot of tea and I drink tea. I burn incense, I'm listening to the French radio, to some relaxing music. So anything that can help you get in the zone is nice too. So now I'm going to talk about breaking the rules. It can be confusing when you start a new medium because you look up to other artists to see what they are doing. And I found especially with watercolor, you get advice from different persons and sometimes they contradict each other, so it can be confusing. But I believe you have to try different things and see really, find out what will work for you. So we get inspired by other artists' work and techniques, but it's important not to copy exactly what they do, but just be inspired by them. And I'm going to show you a few examples of artists that did inspire me and how I did incorporate some of their ideas and some of their techniques into my own works. So the first artist I'm going to talk about is Linda L. Moyer. I read her book, Light Up Your Watercolors Layer by Layer, a few years ago now. And it's the first time I was reading about layering colors with watercolor. And I really liked the light effects she could achieve on her landscapes. The colors are very luminous and bright, and I really liked that. And so the idea of layering is that you will paint one color after the other. So for example, if you want to make some green, you're going to paint first a layer of yellow, let it dry, and then paint a layer of blue on top and you get some green. And then maybe after you will add another layer of light red to subdue the green in some part. So it's a bit like the printing process, like you separate each color on your paintings. So I was really intrigued by that technique, and so I tried it on my own work. And I tried it mostly on portraits because portraits are a bit tricky to paint with watercolor. And especially if you get too many hard edges on a portrait, they start to look stiff and a bit unnatural. So I applied Linda's techniques to portrait painting, and this is an example. This is my older daughter. And I really liked it, like to get the effect of the lights like this on the skin tones. And so this is one example. And another example is Tim Saterno. I first heard about him in a watercolor magazine. And he paints mostly cityscape of New York. And they are very dramatic because he uses very high contrast in his paintings. But what I really liked was the painterly effect he has. So he was explaining his technique in the magazine. So basically he paints the picture first and then he sprays it with water and he lets the paint move and do its own thing. So I was thinking this is a really interesting technique, and so I tried it too. I first tried it on the cityscape. So this is Vancouver. This is what you see when you come from the Lionsgate Bridge into the city. So I tried it, but see, it's the same technique, but I adapted it to my own style with softer colors and my own color schemes. So I liked that, but I thought this was still a bit too close from what he's doing. So I switched it to some different subjects. So you have an example here on the left. It's a forest painting in watercolor. And so I did the same thing. Once the painting was done, I sprayed and I added some drips and I added a bit of gouache. And you don't necessarily see it from a distance, but when you look close at the painting, you can see all the drips and all the paint moving. And I did it also on portraits, like you can see on the right. It's a portrait of my younger daughter. So it's the same technique, but I made it my own because I wanted it to be more subtle than my, like the dramatic style of Tim Saterno works really well for his subject and what he's doing, but it's not what I'm doing, so I changed it a bit. This is another example. So same thing, if you look at the painting from a distance, you might not see all the details and the drip, but when you look from close, you see them better. And this is another example. So you can see how I did splash water on the painting after it was painted. And I think this technique works really well for all marine themed subjects like boats and it's good for Vancouver too because we have so much rain. So to me, it kind of looks like the rain too. So now I'm going to talk about experimenting. When I first started watercolor, I had in mind those pretty pictures of washed out colors, like very traditional. And I started looking at what everybody else was doing, and I saw that you can make watercolor look very contemporary and exciting. And it's a very versatile medium. And I started to look at the Splash series book, and it was great for me to see how many different artists could look so different with the same medium. And like you can make watercolor look very different, and you can make it look very modern too. So I'm going to give you a few examples of things I tried to do and experimentations with my paintings. In all of my work, I'm quite excited about mixing elements of drawings and painting. So this is an example of a portrait of my daughter. I did the painting first, so using the layering technique we were talking about before. And then when the painting was done, I did add all the lines with a crayon, a bit like you would do when you quickly sketch a portrait. And same thing, you might not necessarily see it when you look at the portrait from a distance, but when you go and you look closer, you see all the details and all the line. And I found that was a quite neat effect. I did also experiment with totally drawing one part of the painting and painting another part. So like in this example, for the hands, I just did a very light wash. And then I wanted them to look a bit like a classical drawing. And then, so when the wash was dry, I used crayon to draw the hands. So, and you will see another example. It's in most of my works. This idea of mixing drawing and painting is something that I find really exciting. And you can see the bottom part of the painting is left unfinished with some drips, and it's something you can experiment too. Like I found it looked quite modern. It's a different way, and it's also about not trying to be perfect totally. So you can try things like that. And this is another example. So you wouldn't necessarily guess it's watercolor, but it's watercolor on translucent Yupo paper, and I added some pastels. The fun thing about translucent Yupo paper is that you can play with transparency and paint on both sides of the paper. And this is from an old picture of me that my parents took a long time ago. And apparently they were minimalist before it was a trend. But see, like this is something to me that looks quite modern for watercolor painting. So now I'm going to talk about taking time to explore. I really think that as artists, sometimes we get a bit too much pressure to be very, very consistent. So ideally, maybe one painting always the same size, on the same support, with the same medium, same color, and same subject. But if you try to be too consistent, you kind of lose the excitement and you don't explore because you end up painting the same painting all over again with a bit of variation. So I think it's important to give yourself the freedom to explore and try new things. So I'm going to give you an example with portrait paintings, and exploring doesn't mean going into all directions randomly, but to me I see it more as an evolution from one painting to the other. So every time you start a new painting, maybe you change a little something, and then it's going into one direction, and it evolves. So I'm going to show you an example with portraits. So I did lots of portraits of my kids, and this is a portrait of my son in watercolor. So same thing, I used the layering technique. And it is quite traditional in a way, except the cropping maybe is a bit more important. But so I did many paintings like this, and then I got a bit tired of this, so I wanted to try new things. And so things I tried, for example, was to be a bit more loose in style. So this is a portrait of a friend of my daughter. And I also tried to incorporate patterns into the portraits. So this one is done with colored pencils, I believe, on the side. So I did a stripe of patterns. And I really liked that idea. Like I found it interesting to mix the drawing and painting and patterns into the painting. So I started to explore more into that direction, and it led me to paint things like this. So same idea, except the patterns are becoming more important. This is from a self-portrait my daughter took in front of the mirror. And I saw the picture and I was thinking it would be nice to use the lens of the camera as the central point for circular patterns. So this is what I did here, and it's watercolor, but there's also mixed media in that painting. So if you look along the edges of the figure, you can see a black line. So it's because the first layer I did paint after the portrait was India ink all over the painting. And then I added a layer of white acrylic on top. And then I drew the patterns with colored pencils, and there was watercolor and watercolor crayons too. This portrait is featured in the book. You have some pictures of the painting process, and I explain how I did it. But you see the patterns are becoming more and more important in the painting. And so then continuing to work into that direction, it led me to do portraits like this. So I did this one not long ago. This one is on canvas, so it's not on paper, and it's with fluid acrylics. And I did the figure in graphite. So same idea of mixing drawing and painting and the patterns that are becoming more and more important. So now I'm going to talk with displaying your watercolor. That's another way you can experiment with what you do. You have some alternatives to traditional framing, and I talk about it a bit in the book. One thing I really like to do is to mount paper, so it can be Yupo paper or watercolor paper on board. I do that with heavy gel medium. So basically it's like gluing the paper on the board, and then I trim the sides and I sand them to make them clean. And when you do that, you can varnish or wax your painting after, and it looks like you can put it on the wall directly, and it looks like an acrylic or an oil painting on board. The biggest painting I did that way is this one. It's 48 by 48 inches. So of course, if you go that big, you need to buy a roll of paper. And I think it's about the maximum size you could get on one side anyways. You can see on the picture, I did mount the paper and then I did paint the painting. But you can go the other way too, like you could finish the painting on paper and if you're happy with it, mount it on board after. I kind of like to mount it before because it stretches my paper at the same time I'm mounting it. So I get to paint on a very hard and flat surface, which is neat. And so, yeah, when you're finished mounting your paper on board, you need to apply a finish to at least make it water resistant. So sometimes I do it with wax. I like it, it's fun and it's easy to do. You do it like you would do on furniture, for example. You can let it dry and you can buffer it after to make it shiny. It's nice. I don't think the wax has UV protection though. So the other thing you can do is varnish your watercolor and then you get extra UV protection. So this is an example of watercolor on paper mounted on board and varnished. So now I'm going to talk a bit about experimenting with mixed media. Watercolor is really a great medium to use in conjunction with mixed media, and basically anything you can use on paper you can use with watercolor. So there are many media you can use, like colored pencils, pastels, gouache, ink, acrylic, and yeah. So I'm going to give you a few examples of paintings where I did use mixed media. So the first one is on Yupo paper. So markers are really fun and easy to use with watercolor. For this one, I just did paint a simple abstract background with just mixing two colors, and I used wrap paper on top of the paper when the wash was drying, so I got really nice textures on the Yupo paper. And by the way, a neat technique to make texture that works on watercolor paper will work even better on Yupo paper because it picks up the textures really well. And so you can see on the right, it's the finished painting. So I did draw these detailed flowers with a marker just on top of the background. So that's something you can try. You can also easily use colored pencils on your watercolor paper. So here I'm using them to add a stripe of patterns on a flower painting, but you can also use them if you want to add really tiny details to your painting. Sometimes it's easier to draw them than to paint them, so you can do that with colored pencils. Works really well. And India ink also, I really like to use India ink. It's really cheap. You can buy a big bottle and you can make great variations of gray just by diluting it in water, and you can use it in conjunction with watercolors. So for example, this is a portrait of my youngest daughter, and everything is painted with India ink except the red parts that are watercolor. And then I did add a stripe of patterns with a watercolor crayon. And this time I dipped the crayons in the water so I could have a thicker line with the crayons. So India ink is something you can try. It works really well with watercolors. So now I'm going to talk about taking risk. I think it's important to take risk. Of course, you have a bigger risk of not of failure and not liking your painting at the end, but that's the way you learn. And I think if you don't take risks, you kind of lose the excitement of painting. So it's important to take risk. And when we begin, and for me, something that was difficult and I had trouble to take risk with is taking a distance from my reference picture. So when I started, I was working from pictures, and really everything that was on the picture had to be in the painting. And if it was on the painting, it was because it was on the picture. So it was like I was scared to change anything from the picture. And the more I paint now, the more I'm able to take a distance from the reference picture. And I think it's important to be able to modify what you see in your reference pictures. And the easiest way to do this for me is to take the time to think about what attracted you to paint this picture in the first place. So if you look on the left here, this picture, I really liked it, and so I tried to think what did I really like in the picture. And actually what I like was just the scattered red leaves against the backdrop of trees. So basically you can see the finished painting on the right. That's just basically all I kept from the painting was this, a few leaves and then the trunks. Everything else I made up. So and you can do the same with portraits. Like this is the reference picture I use for the portrait of my daughter. It wasn't really a good picture. Like the camera wasn't, the image was not straight, and the background was not interesting. But what I liked in the picture was mostly the patterns of light and dark on the face. So this is what I kept in the finished painting, and I just made up my own background and I forgot everything I didn't like in the reference picture. So so now I'm going to talk about the medium of watercolor. I think watercolor has a bad reputation, like you hear that it's difficult to fix mistakes, that it's very technical, that if you paint something wrong, there's no way of changing it. And it's not quite true. I think watercolor is quite forgiving, and I change my mind a lot when I paint, and I move the paint around quite a bit. And so I'm going to show you ways of changing your mind and fixing what you don't like in a painting. So the easiest way to fix a color, for example, is to paint over them by glazing or layering, if you wish. So basically, you paint a semi-transparent layer of color on top of another one. And you have to be careful that the layer underneath is really, really dry, because you don't want to move the pigment. You might get muddy color if the layer underneath is not totally dry. So in that example, I painted the first layer of bright yellow, and I let it dry, and I went over it with a light layer of blue. So you can see how it changes the yellow to green. And then I wanted to have a more subdued green, so I painted a very light layer of red. So if there is any color you don't like in your painting, you can modify it quite a bit by glazing over it. What happens though is that the color you will get will always be darker, because watercolor is transparent and every layer you paint is adding up. So your colors are getting darker and darker. So this technique can work only if you want to get a bit of a darker color. If you want to get lighter color, you have different ways of doing it. So it's easy when the paint is still wet. You can just use a very dry brush, or you can use a tissue paper, and then you just take off the paint with the tissue paper. This is a technique, by the way, that works really well to paint clouds. You can do that this way. And if the paint is dry, you can still move it and take it off. And what I do a lot is I use what I call a stiff brush. So basically, you can see on the right, I'm taking an old brush that I don't want to keep anymore, and I just cut it with a pair of scissors. I cut the hair very close to the ferrule. So then I get a brush that's really stiff. And with a bit of water and that brush, you can lift off most of the paint on your paintings. And I use that technique a lot when I paint portraits. If I think they are becoming a bit too dark, to retrieve some of the light in the lighter areas, I do that a lot. And it works great. The only thing you have to watch for with this is that you have to use good quality paper, because if your paper is not good quality, it might peel off. So what you see on the picture on the top. But good paper will take quite a bit of scrubbing off easily, and it won't damage the paper. And then if you're open to using mixed media on your watercolors, it's quite easy to modify any area, and it's not a problem to go from dark to light. For example, you can glue pieces of tissue paper with gel medium, which is what I'm doing on the left. So you fix them with gel medium, you let them dry, and if the tissue paper is white, you will get a lighter color and you can paint on top. Or if you are using acrylic or gouache, you can paint light and dark into any area of your painting. So on the example on the right, it's a portrait. I did layer a few colors in the background with watercolor. And then I made a mix of gouache and a bit of blue watercolor, I believe. And so I paint this layer on top, and because gouache is not as transparent as watercolor, it's a bit opaque, I can paint a lighter color on top of a darker color. So that's some things you can try. And sometimes it happens that we try to tweak a painting here and there, and still we don't like it. Or sometimes it's overworked. So then you can take extreme measures. So what I do is I take the painting and I put it directly in the bathtub and I rinse it with the shower head, and then I scrub it very lightly with my fingers. So you can try this, and you won't get your paper back to white paper, but you will get what I call a ghost image of your painting. So it's what you see on the right. You can still see the areas that you painted, but you can let that new, you can let the paper dry on, so here it's on a stretching board, or you can stretch it on a foam board, for example, so it doesn't buckle when it dries. And when it's dry, you can rework that painting. So here what I did is I did add a bit of more contrast on the mountains and the boat. And I changed my mind about what I wanted the painting to be. So I added lots of patterns with a white marker. So you can see the finished painting on the right, and it's quite different from what I started with. So that way you can change your mind quite a bit. Now I'm going to talk a bit about finding your own styles, because it's something sometimes we worry about, but I kind of think you don't have to look for your own style. Like the more you paint, the more it will come naturally to you. And you can think about the process of painting as a cascade of decisions that start with what do I paint and what materials do I use? And then all these decisions end up with how do I display my painting and how do I finish it? And not two persons are likely to make the same decisions. So all these decisions at the end will define your style. And some of the decisions we make, like our brushes and our colors, are also going to define our style. So for example, me, I really like the angled brush that you see on the left, because it's very versatile. Like I can use it to do a flat line, but then if I turn it, I can do a very thin line with the side. And so it's almost the only brush I'm using now. I really like it. And I'm always attracted to the same colors. Like I have a palette of maybe 15 colors, and sometimes I try new ones, of course, but I kind of always get back to those colors. And this helps define my style, I think. So this is a screenshot of my website. So this is the gallery with all the forest paintings. And some of these paintings are small, some are big, some are on paper, some are on canvas, some are watercolor, some are acrylic. But you can kind of see that because I'm always attracted by the same colors and it's the same subject, it still looks consistent because the colors are quite consistent. So. And yeah, finally, I want to talk about embracing your individuality. So sometimes as artists, we think I'm too much of this or not enough of that. So for example, I'm painting too loose or I'm painting too much details, I'm too tight, or I paint too much dark colors or bright colors. So and then we try to compensate for this. But I think sometimes what makes you different is what makes you unique too. So if we all meet in the middle, we will end up all to make the same paintings. So it's important to accept and have fun with what you are. So for me, a few years ago, I decided to embrace the fact that I'm really attracted to details and that I like these tiny patterns. And I'm actually having fun with this, and I'm not trying to be different than what I like to be. So now I've decided to go all the way for details and patterns. Now I'm going to talk a bit about finding inspiration, and I really believe our everyday life and our hobbies and interests are the best source of inspiration for our art. And I'm going to give you a few examples in my own life. So first, our family and friends. So when I started watercolor, I did lots of portraits. And basically, it's mostly my family, friends, lots of my children, some self-portraits. And I think it was great to start like this because first they made very, very enthusiastic and willing models. And also you know them well. So I think it helps when you paint a portrait. And I've seen many artists being inspired by their family or scenes of everyday life, and sometimes they can make really striking and strong work. So I really think, yeah, your everyday life is a really good source of inspiration. And also sometimes what you do for fun, like your hobbies or your interest. So for me, recently, I had this, I think I saw this on Etsy the first time. Um, what you see on the left is some big river rocks, and I like to cover them with crochet. And then I use them as paperweight and or door stopper. But so anyways, I like to crochet, and I did quite a bit of crochet. And when I looked at my forest paintings, I saw the same kind of idea going on, which is covering something that you found in nature with some kind of fabric or knitted or crochet pattern. So it's kind of the same idea that found its way into my paintings. And when you look at some of the patterns, they really look like they could be some crochet, like the one you see on the tree here. So, and then this is another example here of a mixed media flower painting. So you can see the part on the tabletop. I thought maybe that's because I'm having fun with crochet. It kind of finds a way into my paintings. And so I took this idea to the next step. And for the next forest painting I did, so it was the same idea of covering the trees with patterns, but for the patterns I used the patterns you look at when you crochet. So if you're familiar with crochet, you might recognize some of the stitches here. So yeah, so that's how crochet did inspire some of my work. If you sew, there are many things you can do, and sewing on paper is quite fun actually. I really like the result. You get a very crisp, fine line that looks like a drawing but really crisp. And so the only thing is you're limited by the size of the arm of the machine, of course. So you cannot do it on a huge piece of paper, or you can do it on the side anyways. But it works really well with postcards, for example. You can sew on little postcards. And also sometimes you can use the materials to incorporate into your paintings. So for example, you can glue fabric. And so this is a mixed media painting I did a long time ago. And I had all these sewing supplies, so I use a bit of thread to, like the green line you see on the top middle part is thread that I've been gluing on the canvas with gel medium. And then I used oil pastel to make the line more obvious. So that's something you can think too, like maybe how to use some materials from your other interest and incorporate them into your paintings. And this is another example. Because texture works so well on Yupo paper, in that example, I just left a piece of thread dry on a wet wash, and then it leaves a trace. So you can also use materials kind of like stamps or to leave a trace on a wet wash. So you can experiment with some of that. I'm doing also a lot of live drawing, and I'm quite excited about it. I go to a weekly class, and so you can see an example of my drawing on the left. And it's been also an inspiration, and it's becoming more and more an important part of my paintings. So if you look at the drawing, you can see that I kind of outline a shade area, and then I use cross hatch to make it darker. And I do that a lot into my drawings, and I see that this also is making a way into my paintings. So if you look on the right, it's one of the latest 3 paintings I did. And I kind of use that same area of outlining an area and cross-hatching, and I use different type of cross-hatching to represent the bark of the tree. And this is the finished painting, but so same thing, you have to look at it closer to see all the details on the trunks with the bark. And this is another way I did recycle some of my live drawings into Yupo paper paintings with lots of patterns. And also into my latest portrait paintings. Also, I think the drawing is becoming more and more important. So I have 2 daughters, so this is the second portrait I did using this technique of having the body in graphite and then the background all with patterns and fluid acrylics. So this is how drawing is, because it's something I like to do as a hobby, or is making more and more its way into my own paintings. How it's inspiring me to try new things. So this is the book, Fearless Watercolor for Beginners. It's split into 3 parts. Basically, before you paint, so it's more about inspiration, materials, and setting up and everything. While you paint, which is all the techniques and experimenting with mixed media, and then after you painted, like displaying your watercolor, finishing, and also self-evaluating your work. This is inside the book. So so you have a few demonstrations in the book. So this one is about stretching watercolor paper. And for most of the demonstrations and for many things in the book, you have extra content online. So you can click if it's an ebook, or you can go to the address if it's a printed book. And then you see extra content. So in that case, it's because I'm talking about stretching your paper. The extra content is what happens if I'm finished with my painting and it's all buckled. So what can I do to make it flat again? And yeah, I was saying that I don't believe there is one way that works for everybody. So this is an example of alternatives way I'm giving in the book that you can try and experiment with. So alternatives for applying paint. So you can apply it with a brayer or with a sponge, or maybe you can use a dropper, or why not use your fingers, which is something I do a lot. So you can see, you can try different things and see what works for you. And this is a demo, and for most of the demo of finished paintings, there is a link to a video, so you can actually see me paint that picture on the video. So that's it.
All right. Wow. Thank you so much, Sandrine. And thanks everyone for joining us. Now is the time for questions. So please type those into the question section of your GoToWebinar control panel. And I also wanted to let everyone know that if you want to pick up Sandrine's book at northlightshop.com, that you can use coupon code FEARLESS10 and then just enter that at checkout and you'll get 10% off. And that's good on both her ebook and the hard copy. All right, we have a few questions coming in here. The first one is from Leonard, and he asks, do you spray the water after the painting is dry or when it's wet?
That's a good question. I spray it when it's dry. You could do it when it's wet, but it might make it too blurry at the end. So if it's dry, you have more control on what's happening. So I let it dry and then I spray.
Okay, thank you. And then we have this question has been asked by two different people, Carrie and Sharon, and they both are wanting to know what type of board do you use to mount the Yupo paper and where do you get those boards for mounting?
So I use what is called a cradled panel. And you can find them at most art supply stores. So basically, it's a board. Sometimes you can use it to paint with acrylic or oil. So except I'm using it just to mount my paper on it. So.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And Eileen, I'm sorry, is asking if you have workshops and if you have a workshop schedule or something somewhere.
So I do workshops in my studio in North Vancouver. And I have 2 online classes also on my blog. One is a painting class for mixed media to paint flower from imaginations, and the other one is more of a marketing and how to sell your art online kind of class. But yeah, I do workshops in my studio here in North Vancouver.
Okay, cool. And let's see, Janice asks, can you iron the paper to smooth it out after your painting is finished? The paper is 100% cotton, correct?
Yes, so I did that a few times with a very low setting on the iron, so you can do that. But I try to avoid anything that could damage the paper or make it less archival. Sorry. So what you can do too is spray it at the back of the painting with water, just plain water, and then put it in between, for example, 2 sheets of plexiglass with some weight on top. So that way you're making like kind of a press for the paper. And because the paper is wet, it will dry flat in the press.
Cool. All right, thank you. This next question comes from Cheryl. Cheryl says, I love all your creativity and sense of adventure in your paintings. How long did it take you to develop your personal style?
Um, I'm not sure because it's like doesn't happen one day or it's like a progression. But
Hmm.
I think the more you paint, the more self-confident you become, and then it's easier to take risk. And but I would say maybe after 5 years of painting, I started to find more of a unique style. Like before that, I was just trying to learn the techniques and become just a better painter. But yeah.
Great, cool, thank you. And then let's see, Sharon is asking if you can share your website information. Do you have a website that people can go and see your schedule and stuff? And
Yeah, so I have a website and I have a blog. So my website is sandrinepelissier.com. And my blog is easier maybe to to spell. It's paintingdemos.com.
okay, cool. And I think that's most of the questions. I had one for you. I'm just kind
Mhm.
of wondering, with all the detail and everything that you put into each piece, how long does it take you from, say, start to finish to get your average work done?
So it depends on the size because I have a huge variety of size. I do small paintings that are 12 by 12 inches, and then I do the big ones that are 48 by 48. So if it's a small one, maybe one day or two is enough, like the
Oh,
really small ones.
wow.
But if it's a big one, maybe 2 or 3 weeks average to get all
Ah,
the
okay.
details. Yeah.
That's more what I was thinking. You just put so much into them. I would just think it would have to take
Yes.
some amount of time, but oh, your
Yeah.
work is just really great, and I love like your some personal touch and your personal sense of style and all of that that you can obviously see in it. So, uh,
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
definitely, it's just beautiful. And then let's see. Carolina asks, can we buy your book here in Brazil? Yes, you can. We will ship it to you. So you can just go on over to northlightshop.com and take a look at that. And any other questions? If you guys have them, please type them into the questions section. We're asking if you can repeat the name of the blog one more time.
Oh, it's paintingdemos.com. So painting like a painting, all attached demos, demos.com.
Perfect. Paintingdemos.com. And I'm sure if you just Google Sandrine, you can find her website and all of her stuff
Yes.
as well. So, all right. Well, I hope everyone will pick up her book at northlightshop.com. Remember, the coupon code is Fearless10, and that information will be coming to you. I'll have links to the book at the shop, as well as a link to watch the recording, all coming in the follow-up email, which will be heading your way either tomorrow or the day after that. So keep an eye out for that. And of course, you can share this with all your friends who weren't able to make it, or share it on Facebook or whatever you want to do. And thank you, Sandrine, so much for doing this today. It was great to learn a little bit about what you do and peek inside your book.
Thank you, Sarah.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. We hope to see you at another online event soon. And have a great day, everyone. Bye bye.
Bye.